Wine world, welcome to a special edition of Silicon Valley Bank State of the Industry Report. Uh, Interestingly, we don't have a report this time, and we don't have a survey that we've done either. Instead, we have gone through a crazy time. We're all searching for answers. And I think at this point, we're all starting to catch our breath and figure out where we are. So we pulled together a pretty cool panel, and I'm happy to introduce them to you. But first, couple housekeeping items. All of the lines are muted, so you really don't have to think about that. Your chat has also been disabled. It would look like the Matrix movie with the chat going up and down if we didn't. You can submit your questions to the Q&A panel. And with that, let me introduce you to the guests. Most of these people I'm sure you already know. Paul Leary is founder and principal of Assemblage Consulting Group. And then Amy Hoops is president of Wente Winery. Max Heinemann, wine and spirits manager from Nielsen CGA. Danny Brewer, Nielsen Beverage. And Jeff Bitter is president of Allied Grape Growers. So, the panel covers a pretty good cross-section of people. And hopefully we get enough views from the panel from different angles. And maybe we can talk about where we are and where we're headed. And I think, actually, why don't we start with slide 5 if we can. And let me just talk about where we have been. So this is a slide from information I pulled together, whether that was last year's State of the Wine Industry survey or various other places. But this is the way things looked on March 20th, 2020. We had mailing and subscriptions that represented about 10% of sales. Wine Club was 23%. Phone and e-commerce together were just 3%. Exports were 3%. And off-premise wholesale was 18%. So we lost in one day, on average for the average winery, typical winery, we lost 44% of sales. And we woke up one day. It was, it's like the Wizard of Oz. We're not in Kansas anymore. And so if I can move the slide animation forward, this is what we looked like, 8 weeks to May 8th. Look at the change. Wine clubs, 35%. E-commerce jumps to 16%. Phone sales jumped to 10%. Exports dropped a little bit. Off-premise wholesale jumped to 20%. For the typical winery, and restaurants almost nothing, but a little bit of restaurant still there. Restaurants figured out how to pivot and do some curbside and the ability to sell some wine. That helped a little bit. Tasting room didn't totally go away. We figured out how to do curbside pickup and some ways to work around it. Mailing and subscriptions stayed about the same. I think I said e-commerce, really jumped. But that's the average winery's channel mix, and it's different from what we've seen for the wine industry as a whole. Because while the small wineries of the world, at least in the United States, have seen sheltering in place and closures like we would never ever imagine. Larger production wineries that have 3-tier representation and are in grocery have actually done pretty well. And I think, Danny, can you speak to that one point, please?
Sure, Rob. Maybe we can move to slide 10, and as we do that, I can just give a little bit of an intro to this. So first of all, Nielsen this is a measurement of off-premise channels. Or certain off-premise channels, food, drug, mass merchants, club, and several pieces of the liquor channel, several geographies, and 20 or so liquor chains. And all we've done here is, and there's a bunch of lines here, but we've got the year-on-year growth rates for the 52 weeks just up to when all hell broke loose, which is about the end of February. And then the year-on-year growth rates for every week since then, since March 7th. So now we're up to about 10 weeks. And then the last data point on the right-hand side is the full 10 weeks in aggregate versus 10 weeks of a year ago. And this shows the dollar percent change versus a year ago. Just for sort of one benchmark, all categories beyond alcohol are the total FMCG fast-moving consumer goods line. That's in black. All alcohol is in blue, beer, wine, and spirits. Beer, including hard seltzers, is in gold. Spirits is in green, and wine is in red. So you can see sort of the year-on-year, enormous growth rates. Obviously, in huge part, that's channel shifting because, as Rob mentioned, people can't go to certain places, and so are going to fulfill their needs in some of the channels that are open, like the ones that we're measuring. This is dollars. I also put on the right-hand side what the volume growth rate is. And there's some math that we can do from here. And the math that we can do from here is if we assume, and each category is a little bit different, but if we assume on average that on-premise is about 20% of the industry, total industry, and wine's a little bit below that, but let's go with that 20%. And sales are down for alcohol by, say, 90% because there's still a little bit left over alcohol to go and those sorts of things. Then we would need to see about a 22% growth rate in what is open in the off-premise to offset the on-premise declines. So I drew that sort of dotted line around that 20, 25, 22% mark, just so we can see what's above that and what's below it. And I'll, again, come back to the volume numbers on the far right-hand side. So you can see spirits volume up 33%, wine up 28%, and beer less than that, up about 17%. Because the question I'm asked all the time is, so do you think at the end of the day, and not the average winery, but in total, do you think the industry is growing or not? And we're measuring sales. This isn't consumption, and we're not measuring everything. And there is some pantry loading and all sorts of other things. But I would actually say that the industry is growing, probably better than it was by the end of 2019.
I didn't know there'd be math, by the way, and so so please.
I didn't show it there, but it's.
Please don't do any more math. But
No.
but I have a question on the slide. Are you including DTC in this? So to the extent you got your 22% that's offsetting on-premise losses, are you figuring DTC into that?
Not really. I'm going to take it to another slide in a second. There's some click and collect here from the Walmarts or the Targets or the Bevmos of the world. There's some of that in here, but for the large part, not really. So maybe we can just flip quick. We can look at the DTC
and so DTC is about 10% or so of total wine sales, right? So here we have in math, we got 22%. That's offsetting wine at 27%. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 5%.
Now you're doing the math.
Yeah, I have to use my finger. I have to do, and then a DTC on top of that, right? Yeah. On top of that. So, we got to be at a 10% growth rate, something like that.
I think maybe a little less than that, but I do think we're growing. I mean, there's just trying to put together the puzzle that is wine isn't the easiest thing, but
no, and the data that I show, and by the way, nobody has data that agree when it comes to the DTC side right now. We have some people that show DTC is way up, and I'll show you a slide in a minute, and where we show DTC is actually exactly even with last year. Which is pretty surprising when you look at the loss from restaurants and tasting rooms. Well, direct to trade, it would be included. And then you have some that say, no, DTC is way down. So it is kind of hard to figure it out. But you're going to go to the slide, Danny?
I was just going to say on the shipment side, which is slide 12, shipments are way up, obviously, because that's, and both because existing buyers, but also new buyers, like people who just haven't bought online before. They're looking for ways that they can fulfill their needs. So this shows annual growth rates on DTC shipments, that had been decelerating right up until the end of February. And then you can see the huge increases in March and April with volume going up a lot faster than dollars. And so the average price of the DTC ship bottle is declining pretty rapidly. In fact, Napa wines last year, they were $69 on average. This year it's 52. And I would suspect that's both because existing wineries are dropping their prices on some of their products, plus new buyers coming into the market are buying just at lower price points as a new buyer.
Yeah, and then Jeff, I think part of this has to do, is one of the questions that we got in registration, what's happened with the situation with the oversupply that we talked about in the State of the Industry report early this year. Yeah, we still have a lot of juice out there, and my belief is that we have a fair amount of that is being shoved through private label, and so we're creating maybe some brands that are new, and it's not like we're dropping prices everywhere on our major brands, but we're making less of those, and we're moving that juice out in other ways. What do you say?
Well, one of the things I've been saying all along here is that we have a bigger problem, I think, with current inventory than what we would actually project to be our inventory for the future based on, new crops coming in, because we have seen growers respond to the market by removing vineyards. In fact, if you put up slide 16, we can show a little update on where we think vineyard removals are this year. And it's obvious that the coastal areas have responded to the change in the market last year and are removing quite a bit more vineyards than they have in recent years. That blue section of the bar chart is coastal removals. So, overall, I think if we were, in theory, if we were in balance today on inventory, I would say that we would be in pretty good shape going forward. We have not yet accomplished the vineyard removal number that I suggested at Unified, which was 30,000 acres. This chart indicates, between 35 and 40,000 acres, but you have to remember that we also need to pull out about 15 to 20 per year just for attrition to replace, for the vineyards that are coming in to stay at the same amount of overall acreage. So overall, Rob, I would say right now we're kind of, we're certainly still in a long inventory position, but we are making the adjustments for the future that will help us out.
Can you break that into higher priced versus production regions?
Yeah, definitely. So, the bar chart that you see there is green is the interior regions, blue is coastal. But what I can tell you is that based on what we've seen in the coast, the North Coast is much slower to remove vineyards than the Central Coast. The Central Coast has responded. We think that maybe 12 to 15% of bearing acreage was actually removed this winter, or will be removed if it hasn't been yet. In the North Coast, we think that's probably barely 5%. And so there's certainly a difference in how the regions respond. And I think that will end up playing through on the supply side, of course, down the road as people are looking to fulfill program needs and be able to adjust to where the grapes are actually at.
So Rob, I think I think there's an interesting look at, where are the silver linings? We never let a good crisis go to waste, as Churchill said, and you got to make some lemonade out of the lemons. And I think with the long position that we've seen ourselves coming in even before the pandemic, and now some of the shifting in consumer behaviors, or as I see it, the acceleration of behaviors that we've been really forecasting here for the last, couple of chats we've had over the last 2 to 3 years around consumer behaviors and what they'll do. It's almost the perfect storm of an opportunity to do a couple of things. If you're a small winery, there's an opportunity to continue to accelerate your engagement in D2C and really build the relationship that you've already started, whether that's by continuing through your club or moving on to referral. If you're a larger winery, to your point, Rob, if you have access, sure, you can go create new brands or have private labels, but you can also be really thoughtful about the way that you engage further on ramping up the opportunity to be a more consistent part of your consumer's life, right? So people always wonder, if I drop my prices when times get hard, will it erode my brand equity? Overall, the answer would be yes. In a pandemic, there's a bit of a different opportunity here, and it depends where you put those discounts and how you actually serve it up to the customer in order to make it an advantageous win-win for everybody, right? So if you're long and you sell a lot of Cabernet and you can put together programming direct to consumer, because consumers are now buying readily online, and instead of trying to discount the bottle cost, you start to do things where you include shipping as part of the offer if they buy 6 bottles, not just 1 or 2. All these different kinds of things. And there's a myriad of ways we can look at the silver linings and take advantage of this perfect storm of, we still have access, we've got consumers that want to continue to consume. Danny said it. And whether it's 10%, like you were saying, Rob, that we see the increase, we were looking at 0 to loss of growth this year. And if we end up hitting an average of that 2 to 3%, that's a great year. You might be right, it could be closer to 5 to 6% growth. But there's ways that we can take advantage of these things as wineries, regardless of your size, if we start to look at consumer behaviors and really be thoughtful about how we're engaging in the relationship with those people.
So let's move to the elephant in the room, which is, we're starting to reopen. Oregon is in many counties is already reopening in the wine tasting rooms, and so is everything fine? Should we, when we open the tasting rooms, we'll good, just keep doing what we're doing? What about Max? What about restaurants? What do you expect? Is one of the questions we had actually in the registration is how many restaurants are going to be left?
Well, that's very difficult to say. One of the things that has to be a key factor when we think about this is that at the moment, about 36 states have reopened. Thing is, they haven't reopened fully. Some have opened with 25% capacity, others 33%, up to 50%. And so a lot of on-premise outlets which have been scraping together and have made deals with their landlords and their suppliers to defer payments up until things reopen may not be able to reopen may not be able to survive on 25% occupancy. One of the key things, though, however, is if we look at slide 7, is that takeout and delivery has been propping up a lot of on-premise outlets. Now, one of the key things was that 33% of on-premise operators said that they weren't prepared for delivery. So whether that is packaging, whether that is contracts with third-party delivery systems, or even having their own, they weren't prepared. So they had to make that change very quickly. But when consumers were ordering from their local restaurants and bars, the key things that they ordered were red and white wine. Every time when they ordered with alcohol, those were the key drinks. Now, one of the interesting factors is when you look at how people answered in the right table with what they would consider ordering, red and white wine is towards the bottom. So there you have the idea that consumers have found their niche. They do want to try things that they can trust, that they can rely on, that they've had before, and they know that when they order it, they'll be receiving what they're after.
So what do we do with this reopening? I mean, we're going to be reopening into, or some are already reopened into an era where 50% capacity for restaurants. We're going to have, in my belief, and I see this in data, is we'll still have the older population that were the wine buyers sheltering in place.
Well,
it's going to be a period of time.
Absolutely, and one of the things to keep in mind is that in the on-premise, 45% of wine consumers are over the age of 55. But in the states that have reopened, only 4% of on-premise consumers are over 55. So there is going to be that big gap. And another thing is, one of the key thing that consumers will look for when they go back to their bars and restaurants is social distancing, upgraded health and safety, and various hand sanitizers and that kind of thing, even masks on staff. And so it's about taking that fear of being around with other people and making it into a positive experience. Spaced out tables sure can make the venue seem quieter, but it can also afford you with some privacy, and people who have waited 12 weeks to go out on a date can sit there comfortably.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've been talking about a lot, which is, when we reopen, we're going to spend so much time, for the smaller wineries in particular, we're going to spend so much time thinking about touchless hand sanitizers and sneeze guards, and make sure that we have plenty of masks and gloves, all the things that we have to take care of. We might forget that the people that we want to come to the winery and visit us, they're kind of expecting to find normal and have fun. And obviously they get the fact that there's the safety component and all that part of it, but somehow we've got to find out how to have fun and how to laugh at the same time when we're doing this. Paul,
yeah, absolutely. To that point, just because we can reopen, be it a restaurant or a winery, doesn't mean they're going to come. We know that travel is going to be at a much lower rate than in any time in recent history. And so to what Amy was saying earlier, one of the worst things we can do, in my opinion, is go back to the majority of our previous ways. And if you look at slide 5 again, it's the reminder of where we lost all of that on-premise business in restaurants, in sporting venues, in hotels. We have the opportunity to make up a percentage of it in an actually much more interesting way, which is the customer's dining room. The fact that you can get to their table and be on their table, because there's so much more dining at home. That is one of the best things a brand could ever hope for. So a lot of that goes back to slide 6 in making sure, first and foremost, because I see questions coming in about discounting, what should we do? How should we do it? Don't do it if you can afford not to. Please do not, because you will be much happier on the other side of this pandemic. You have to look at the data and understand what's going on in each of your sales channels. And if you're not looking at that first and coming up with a concerted plan of then how to engage with certain content to specific parts of your database, those that are new and are prospects, to those that have been members for a long duration, to those that are ambassadors, each of those has to be spoken to uniquely. Is it a lot of time? It absolutely is. Is it rocket science? No, it's just discipline. And I would argue that if you can connect with people in a meaningful way during this period, that will be much more valuable than discounting and the erosion of your brand as you come into 2021 and 22.
And that is one of the things that has proven to be pretty interesting to me is the way people have pivoted. We can go to slide 4 and maybe talk a little bit about that. I was lucky enough to get the anonymized data from VinSuite, and they reached out to me and was grateful for this. And what this shows is the week-to-week sales from a DTC standpoint. And if we could advance the, there we go. So that actually is the pre-COVID period. And what you can see is normal spring club shipments. There's a little bit of phone. I was actually surprised to see the level of phone activity in there. POS is tasting room largely. That's the blue part. And then the e-commerce is just a bitty part of that. And so we advance the actions again there. And so here we have the post-COVID period, and look at the changes, the club, big changes, phone, little changes. And so if we advance the thing one more time, there we go. And so here's the numbers. You can see in the shelter-in-place period, for phone, you have a 2.7% growth. Club and subscription, 11.8. Tasting room, off the chart, negative. And then, a little bit of e-commerce growth. And that speaks to what has really been happening out in the small wine world, is people have been pivoting. And the data that is comparable year over year, same customers, not, so we take that part out of the data, shows that the customers for VinSuite had pretty much flat sales year over year. So in the post shutdown period, the wineries were able to come back and recover all of the lost ET. Now they didn't recover the winery losses, but because of the way that they attacked the phone side, club and subscription component of that, and e-commerce. And I'd say that part of that e-commerce was passive, with customers looking for you. And as I looked through the data today, what I discovered, there were a number of wineries that they were prepared for this already. So, they hadn't probably focused on it as much, but they were prepared for a heavier e-commerce activity, and they actually did pretty well. But the people, you looked at the slide that we had up just a few seconds ago, and you looked at how many people in the wine industry have folks that are looking at the data, and the majority don't have people looking at the data. And how hard would it be to go through this last period if you haven't been collecting some of the basic stuff that we've talked about now for years and years and years.
Well, Rob, I think it's about
hygiene, yeah.
It's about the relationships, right? And we've always said the wine industry is a relationship business, and really wine inherently connects people within the industry, as we're doing this morning, but also to your customers and to your consumers. And I think it's important to recognize the shifting that we're seeing here again in those consumer behaviors. It's really about those customers saying to us, I want to continue that relationship with you. Try to meet me where I'm at now. I can't come to your tasting room. I mean, you talked about this last summer when we did our DTC portion last summer, and we talked about you can't expect everyone's always going to be able to come to you. And now they definitely can't for the moment. And this is just showing that our fans out there, they want to continue the relationship. So it's about figuring out how you can continue to be that friend and to connect with them, whether that's by picking up the phone and calling your best customers, whether it's by, offering, you don't have to be in the club, but if you love our Chardonnay, we'll sign you up for subscription. So it comes to your door every 2 weeks at the amount that you'd like, right? So you can have it every night, a glass with dinner. And I think that's the interesting part. It's recognizing the behaviors. And to your point, it's slide 6 that shows us so few have really invested in full-time people looking at data. And I'm sure there's plenty of people on this webcast this morning saying, well, how can I even afford that? Start with free. I love free. If it's free, it's for me. Start with Google Analytics. Sign up, get your information, understand where people are coming from and how they're acting when they land, they click on an ad, or they come to your website. And then, of course, you need the general information around anytime you can get a name and an email and a phone number. That's golden, because then you can continue a conversation. How do you deepen a relationship with a friend? You talk to them more, right? You interact, you learn more about them, you're curious, you engage in ways that make them feel valued. And then I think, Paul, to your point, you're right. It's not about discounting, it's about value add. And value add comes not just as lowering my cost of purchasing a bottle, it's about including shipping, right? That's a discount, I suppose, in total, but it's a value added activity because we're friends and I want to help you through this hard time, right? It's value add of picking up the phone and call your club members. You've got their birth date. Anybody that's had a pandemic birthday, if you as a winery haven't picked up the phone to call them or sent them a special note to say we're thinking about you in these crazy times, you've missed an opportunity to deepen a relationship. So it's
Absolutely.
To think outside the box.
I think 2 things you said there. One, that's so important because we're dealing in such unprecedented times, is you have to meet the customer where they are. And Rob, you've spoken of this so often. We have for so long requested they come to us, and that is such a myopic mindset. So on slide 4, where you see that 27% decline in tasting room POS, that's not just about sales, right? That's about lead sources. I actually see that one, and the first thing that comes to my mind is lead source, because it's about the months and quarters ahead. And this is what so many wineries have not done well. They have to think beyond the physical face-to-face lead source and how they think about referrals and digital and affiliate programs. And these aren't scary words. They're just disciplined words to be able to say, how am I going to build my database and be able to put people on different journeys so that I know how to speak to them individually. The key is segmentation. The key is having a database, a system that works to your advantage, not to your hindrance. And to Amy's point, don't think that these systems can't help you. They can, but you have to have strong training and a focus by your team to really get to that level of engagement. Because otherwise you're just saying the same message to people, and the email is going to be deleted, the SMS is going to go unresponded to, the phone call is not going to be picked up. But there's an opportunity there to do it if you are disciplined with this.
And I actually think there's a really good opportunity for wine in particular, because everyone is getting, and I hear you say, Rob, about, the core wine consumer is older, but everyone is getting more comfortable with online and digital. And wine in particular, within the broader alcohol context, we've got probably about 70% of the alcohol online activity. And we've looked at new buyers and how many people are coming online to buy stuff, across all sorts of categories. I think it's slide 11. And sales are going up, and it's largely because new people are coming in that never bought online before. And this is total alcohol, but like I said, 70% of it or so is wine. The other 30% is beer and spirits. And what's not shown here is a disproportionate percentage of these new buyers are older folks. They're not, younger people have always kind of been online. But and then once people go online, there's a huge percentage that stay online as long as the buying experience is convenient and it works and all that kind of stuff. So I think wine, like I said, has an opportunity here.
Yeah, and there's no question in my mind. There is a lot of opportunity, and if the industry is growing, there's a couple questions to ask. If the industry is growing, then you have to say, okay, well, does that continue post-COVID? That's the first question. And the second question is, if you're a small winery, how do you get a piece of that growth? Because right now it's going through grocery, or most of it. I'd have to throw e-commerce in there as well. I think the e-retailers in particular have done a really good job in scaling up very rapidly. But how does the small winery take advantage of that? Is demand going to continue post-COVID? What do you guys think?
Absolutely, demand is going to continue. The question is, how are you going to spur that demand? I see a lot of questions coming in about, if we can reopen our tasting room, should we? Or should we focus on building up a muscle that is more related to lead sourcing and outbound efforts, assuming you have a decent database? In my opinion, it's the latter. Another question came in that said, how do we ship wine when the summer heat is upon us? You invest in your client. You find the most efficient way through cold chain or ice packs or what have you to get the wine there. If you have a sales opportunity, you have to invest downstream, assuming cash flow available, to engage with that client. The opportunity is to really look at the data and saying who has purchased in what channels, at the winery, online. What are they used to? How are they used to interacting with your brand? And see if you can move them to a phone campaign. See if you can move them to an SMS campaign. SMS campaigns, if no one's doing them, have incredible return rates when done right, not just as service opportunities, but as sales opportunities. So really think about diversifying how you engage with your customer or member.
And I think to add to that, when we're looking at the on-premise, in this time that a lot of states have been closed, 63% of consumers have missed a celebration event. And one of the key things is that a lot of the bars and restaurants that are reopening, they're going to be struggling as well. So this is a really key opportunity to work with local bars and restaurants to maybe find a way to meet in the middle. As Amy was saying about maintaining relationships, just because it's past, it's not over. A card can still be sent out and say, go down to Johnny's wine bar to celebrate your birthday that you had a few months ago, have this voucher, and maybe you can get 20% off your bill, and that's something we worked for before. And this will be really important as everything reopens, because 43% of operators have said that they're going to reduce their food menu, compared to only 16% are going to reduce their wine menu. And when so many brands are built in the on-premise, which are then found in the off, this is such a key opportunity to get in the moment where a lot of people are looking for something new, they're looking for something that's going to differentiate their brand. And when only 1 in 5 on-premise consumers are going back to the on-premise, every little thing you do will help you stand out.
And the way, at least in California, interestingly, the way that the restart is taking place is the governor is allowing restaurants to open in Napa County. As a matter of fact, restaurants are going to open this week, I think starting yesterday, or allowed to, with all sorts of, the list of things you have to do to reopen are quite staggering. And yet there's a little carve out in that restaurant guidance that says if you're a winery and you serve bona fide meals, you can also open your tasting room. Don't take my word for it. There's so many rules and regulations to get to, and the counties matter too. The county has to say that it's okay to do it. So you have to get an okay from the EPC, you have to get an okay from the state, you have to get okay. So it's rather complex. It's not as easy as I just made it. But, as I start to think through it, okay, well, if having a bona fide meal served on my property is going to allow me to start bringing people onto my property and collecting names and, having wine service, and the ABC is being, very helpful and forgiving in some of the things that they're allowing now. And the way that the thing reads is you could have a food truck, you could have a caterer, you could have if you have those facilities on site, a kitchen, you could have a chef. And as I think through the restaurant side, there's a lot of restaurants that with 50% capacity are going to be struggling, and they're going to be begging to find somebody to partner with. And if it's a winery where they could serve lunches, and they have a kind of a week lunch to start, in some respects it might be, as they say, 2 non-swimmers meeting in the center of a lake to have restaurants of 50% capacity and wineries the same way. But I think together there's probably some answers to attract some of those consumers.
But Rob, I think it's super important that we remind people we can't wait until every county and the state catch up and ABC says, hey, sure, here's a smaller format size you can start sending. There's so many things we can be doing right now for free and leveraging the channels that are already still open and quite active, and continue to help consumers elevate and engage in a more consistent fashion in the channels that they now have discovered, right? And so, for example, I think it's important that we talk about, hey, you can continue to build the relationship with your consumer and your club members, and you don't always have to be trying to sell them something. Right. And the more you do that, and the more you act as a friend, and the relevant content, I saw a lot of questions in there about, well, what about, digital marketing and what's happening with that? And are we always trying to sell stuff? And the answer should be no. I mean, we were talking about it last night, and I said, every time you take a girl on a first date, you shouldn't always lean over and try to kiss her before you get to know her. Right. So let's figure out how we can build some trust and engage in the relationship in a way that enables you as a winery to say, hey, I'm your friend here. I understand the difficulty you're going through, and give tips and relate to them in a realistic way. You can do that via social with targeted ads. You could do that with your direct mail campaigns. And then you can utilize the core of your consumer base who have been, there with you through the thick and the thin of it, and your club members, and offer them a way to use their trusted relationships as referrals. I received a wonderful postcard from a friend from a winery that they really liked, and it was just saying, I'm thinking about you during these tough times. And then on the postcard, when I turned it around, it said, my friend said, I really love their Sauvignon Blanc, try it. And then it said, for me, I can now use their same discount with this code and get 25% off. So I was like, cool, I'll try it. Bought 2 bottles, loved it, turned around and bought a case. Now I've just purchased 14 bottles of wine from a winery that I'd never purchased anything from, and I did it within a week because a trusted friend that I enjoy similar taste profiles to sent me the recommendation, right? So how are we being, you know, innovative in the way that we're thinking and continuing down these paths, and not just waiting and hoping, hey, I hope Alameda County at some point opens us up, but we're slow and it's going to be a while. And even when we're allowed to be open, people aren't going to be rushing in. It's going to be as many people that are excited to get out. There's just as many, if not more, that are still afraid to take in their mail without Lysoling it and leaving it for 3 days. I mean, it's the reality.
Hope is not a strategy.
Not a strategy.
And what we have to do is the thing we've talked about for now years, as I've said for years, you know, the tasting room was breaking down already. It was losing its opportunity. You couldn't have everybody come through the tasting room. 60% of the average winery's revenue through either the tasting room or club. And to get on the club, the only way to get on the club was pretty much to go to the tasting room in the first place. And, you know, it was a horrible, I understood why we did it, and it was really very successful. And I thought we had gotten to the point of maxing that out, but we needed to take the experience on the road. We needed to you know, define our own brands in different regions. Paul, I know you got some ideas behind, you know, how do we do these things when in fact tasting rooms and restaurants are going to be slower?
Right. Well, exactly what you just said, that Amy said. Hope is not a strategy. That is the worst thing you can do. You can control only what you can control. And what I mean by that is make sure before you get into strategy, you talk about scenarios. What scenarios do you think are going to be relevant to your winery based on your existing cash flow reality, based on your customer mix, et cetera? Then develop strategies around that. Also, to what Amy said is, don't ask for too much too soon. Don't be greedy, especially if they're a newer client. Get disciplined and build them over time. How do you do that? You have to expand your lead sources or your existing customer base sources. What Amy said was the example with the Sauvignon Blanc is one of the most effective forms of marketing on the planet, referral. Get your people that are proud to be one of your clients or proud to be a member to speak on your behalf. You go from this mindset of member to ambassador. That is the holy grail, ambassador. And if you can get them working with you, that is one way. Digital is not scary. There are a lot of tools out there that are built for small businesses with the Instagram, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn's of the world. They are there to help, but it takes a disciplined approach. And then affiliate programs. There are many brands, big and small, right now in the consumer goods area that are scratching their heads going, how do we provide value to our customer base beyond just the price promotion? Because price promotion is a slippery slope. So depending on where your price points are as a winery, you know, that $20 average bottle price, the $50, the 100 bottle, what other brands might you affiliate with that has a similar customer base, where you can add value? This doesn't happen overnight. It happens over months and quarters. And if you have the ability to wait that long, you will have the ability to come out of this on the other side a much healthier brand. But it takes discipline to focus your time here. I saw a comment come in the question saying, how do I engage senior management, right? Senior management doesn't want to listen. They're just thinking and hoping that this will change. You have to come at it from a data perspective. What do you see in your different channels? What do you see beyond the wine industry that you think other companies are doing well? How can you show, you know, not anecdotally, but empirically, that what you're trying to execute is has potential? And listen, there's a lot of reality of throw another dart at the board and see where it hits. You've got to do trial and error to the best of your ability, and you've got to dedicate more time to focusing on the data upstream before you connect with the client.
So there's opportunity, but you know, people are going to say, you know what, we're in the worst unemployment period in our lifetimes. Sure. I mean, I think for the small wineries, this is the worst test that they've been through. I mean, since Prohibition, really. And so that sounds pretty gloomy. You know, what do you guys think is going to happen with things economically? Are we going to somehow have people buy when we have what effectively, I think is right, as of today, something like 18% implied unemployment. That's huge.
Rob, I think that, and the history tells us every time we've had some economic uncertainty, it's not so much that people buy a lot less wine. They usually trade down in their purchase price points. And quite honestly, with the supply situation we have today, they're probably going to be getting some pretty nice wines at some pretty affordable prices for some time. In fact, if you put up slide 17, it kind of shows, where we've been investing in our vineyard plantings in the last few years, and it's been mostly coastal. And that, of course, is driven by the trends of premiumization, and that's where, the market wanted the grapes and supply. And now, I think we're heading into a period potentially where we could see some retraction on not so much consumers' interest in wine, but maybe more so the price points they buy at. And then we have supply coming in the coastal regions that's probably going to be in excess of demand. So that's going to end up cascading down. I think we're going to end up offering out of California some very, very nice wines for the price point people are paying. And I hope that what the result is that they don't drink less wine, that they can find wines that they enjoy at reasonable prices.
And you take yourself off mute.
I should do that. When we go back in history, the total alcohol per, consumption per capita stays really constant. It goes up and down a little bit during the recession and so on, but it's a pretty constant thing. So in the big picture, it's kind of like a share game. And how does wine, how do we make sure that we maintain or grow our share? And the one thing about the wine industry is there's all different price points for almost everybody. I would say that I kind of look at currently and where we're going, that there's going to be two sets of consumers. There's going to be the constrained consumer, may have been furloughed, may not have a job, may have a tough time getting a job. And then there's the insulated consumer who has a job and hopefully will keep it and may have more money to spend on things that they did before because they aren't spending on trips and baseball season tickets and other things that they might want to, but they just can't right now. And those two consumers are going to be looking for different things and moving around their price points to fit their needs, including, sometimes moving up because we talk about premiumization, which if we look at like our data, it's still happening. People are moving up to higher price points, but are they really? Because they're not spending $100 for a bottle of wine. They're getting that same bottle of wine for $35 at a store or whatever, the markup differences are. So it's kind of a different notion, but I think there's these two consumer sets out there that will be there for the foreseeable future. And the constrained one will be heavily populated by younger folks, which is, the cohort that we'd like to get more into the wine category. I think it's gonna be tougher.
It will be. Go ahead, Max.
Well, I just wanted to say with the young folks, it's during COVID-19, during the closures, 35% of them were drinking more. And to follow with Jeff's point about we're going to have a lot of great wines being sold at a lower price point, it's also the time to look at alternative packaging. A lot of people, when they return to the on-premise, won't want to have glasses. They'll want to have cans, single-serve bottles, things where they have as little contact with anyone else. Also because there may be a lack of faith in the hygiene factors of the venue itself. And so we may see more cans, we may see more smaller boxes. And for operators, 51% of them prefer single-serve bottles for delivery. So that's also another great way to get into the on-premise category.
Yeah, to build on that, Max, so the question is, how will format sizes change, how wineries go to market? What is your audience? What is your audience doing with that wine? Are they drinking it? If we're talking about wine, are they collecting it? Are they gifting it? When you understand how your audience or your channel is consuming your product, that should then allow you to understand which format sizes are most relevant. The gifting side is huge. People are gifting virtually. People are gifting physically because they can't engage. There are a lot of companies out there that are trying to find a way to engage with their clients, right? Because they can't go to them, they can't be with them at the conference. How does gifting play into that? If you're a winery that's selling to collectors, you probably don't want to go to cans or 187s or 375s. How does that influence your strategy? But if you're a winery that is selling to drinkers, people that are getting your wine and drinking it, within 24 hours or 7 days or a couple of months, there's opportunity for format change there, in my opinion. And that's something that Rob has talked about for years. And I think the industry really has to think about that in a progressive way.
Hey, Rob,
Yeah.
I know we've talked.
Yeah, go ahead, Danny.
No, I was just going to say, I know we've talked about the younger, how do we convert people coming into legal drinking age to be a wine drinker. And it sort of reminds me, because like we talked about hard seltzers before, and
Yeah.
People don't talk about it as much, but don't be mistaken that that's gone away. So
Should we see that chart?
Yeah, I just wanted to pull up slide 13 because it was a big story like for us before. We were always asked about it, but it's just getting bigger. So the blue line is the weekly dollar sales this year. The purple line is last year, and then 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. It's $2.3 billion now. Like that's bigger than if I add up Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Grigio, or you can do all kinds of math, but it's growing it was growing at 200%. Now it's 300%. And these are younger drinkers. Like that's what kind of worries me a little bit. They're drinking White Claw and Truly, and now Bud's got Bud Light Seltzer and Corona Seltzer, and like everyone's doing it. And some wineries are doing their own thing with winery seltzers, which I think is wine seltzers, which is good. And there's cider seltzers now. There's spirits in a can, seltzer-like products. So this thing is big. It's going to get bigger.
Yeah, and it's we already knew going into this that seltzer was taking away share from wine. Let's not forget that the growth rate in wine, according to most everybody, was getting close to zero before going into this. And so in some respects, kind of changing things up right now is, I hate to use the term a blessing, because obviously this is not a blessing, but there are some, in any crisis, there are some good things that come out of it. And I have another viewpoint about the economy. This is it's another sad fact. The truth is that this economy and the unemployment component of it has been unfairly fallen upon. Really, it's unfairly fallen upon the people that can least afford it. It's people that are in retail dress shops and middle line managements that in malls. It's hospitality. Everybody's aware of that. It's about 75% of this unemployment rate is made up by the people that are low wage. And you know what? They weren't before probably your customer. They were probably more spirits and beer customers, if anything. And so, that is part of the reason why we've somehow in the smaller wine category been able to offset the losses of tasting room by doing some other things. There is demand for our product, but from everything that we can see, the demand isn't really moving still for the younger people. Maybe in some lower price points, but largely it's, they're still in spirits mostly, and then beer. And another thing we have to always keep in mind is that, and we just talked about it with Danny's slide, is that the alcohol beverage consumer today drinks across categories. So our competition isn't so much imports, it is competition, but our competition is everything else. And as we ran into this COVID-19 thing, that all these words that we never had before 90 days ago now, we really were in a very different time with lower growth, and that younger consumer was still not engaged, and I still don't think they're engaging. But this is a time where we have an opportunity coming out of this, where I think they're going to be traveling much sooner than the older population. I think those are the people that are going to be coming to your winery, and we got to prepare for marketing to them and giving them what they're looking for, which includes fun, by the way.
And
Right.
Rob, I think that younger consumer, we talk about them as they're like this elusive unicorn out there. At the end of the day,
Well, they are.
about it. Well, not really. I mean, they want transparency, right? So for me, something that's free, everybody as a company can do, whether you're a supplier, you're a distributor, you're a retailer out there. You need to be able to understand how to simply articulate your core values as a business and be able to show those end to end in the way that you operate and care for your customers, right? And so that's something that will bring much more of the consumer, happens to be younger, and a lot of times that are focused on their well-being and on full transparency, right? We've talked about it. You can tell all the same story anybody in the industry can about the similarities. What makes you different, and why do you connect in a meaningful way with that consumer group you're looking to engage, right? And not all people under whatever age we want to call it, from 21 to 35 or 25 to 45 or whatever cohort you want to talk about, they all don't want the exact same thing, except for the commonality and tie of, I want to understand who you are as an individual. I want it to be authentic, individual or as a company, a brand. I want it to be authentic, and I want it to be consistent. So if you consistently just tell me, hey, I'm offering you a really easy to drink, low cost wine that you can trust the quality of, that might be enough for certain consumers, while other consumers are further along in their journey and their desire to engage in a deeper level to say, I want a company that is site specific, that will tell me how they farm, and also is willing to tell me that they offer, healthcare benefits and coverage for all of their employees, right? Or I want a company during these times to tell me they have not had to lay off anybody because of the other things that they did at the top, right? How do you get senior management involved? You lead from the top and you say, hey, we're going to institute a 20% cut in pay because we're going to take a 20% cut in hours. And we're going to do that so that we can keep every single person on the payroll because we see a bright future ahead. Or you might say, we had to make an unfortunate decision as a company, and we had to, in order to protect the long-term future, we had to lay off a portion of our workforce. But our plan is, as soon as we can see support and more revenue, we're going to hire them back on. Whatever your plan is, be transparent, communicate it, come from a place of value-based leadership as an organization, as a brand, as a supplier, as a distributor, and show that care and understanding that will connect, in such levels that will pay dividends in the long run.
We have an opportunity that we'll never have again in our lifetimes, and that opportunity is the fact that our entire country has been forced to have family dinners, like it or not, like your family or not, however you define your family. With the sheltering in place, they've had to have family dinners, and guess what? They wanted to have wine with it. Whether that was a can of Denison's chili with a bottle of wine. We've established new habits in our country, and guess what? These habits aren't going to go away. And why aren't they going to go away? Because companies have also figured out that working from home works. They don't have to have that premises expense anymore. And what else is going to change? Well, my speaking and traveling. I mean, how many opportunities am I going to have to get on the stage again when we can do things this way? Personally, I love being on a stage. I'd much rather read the audience, and this is, I think, much different. And I think when it comes to virtual tastings, it's much different too. But it's a trade-off, and a lot of this stuff is going to stick. And this working from home is going to stick. You're going to have 2-income families now that are both home at 5. Instead of the commute that they used to have. You're going to have people leaving big cities. The discussion's already out there that people are going to be leaving big cities, going to suburbs again.
But there's a whole lot, Rob, just about like it's the kind of homebody economy, but there's so many things that come with it. I mean, we even look at days of the week shopping, like how it's shifting from the weekend to middle of the week because people are around, or they want to not shop when they think it's busy. I mean, there's just a lot of implications for everything that's going on that you got to kind of think through, what are the challenges and opportunities that come with it.
But there are opportunities.
Yeah, totally.
There are opportunities, And, there are a lot of questions that have bubbled up of, again, when I can't open my tasting room or we have limited traffic to the tasting room, it comes back to the owner or the partner, et cetera, of their willingness to go to where the client or member is. Assuming that's allowed from a health perspective, meet the customer where they are, where they're at physically. If you're a California or Oregon or Washington-based winery, when are you going to decide to go see them in an environment that is approved, and find a way to connect with people? You can't just sit and wait, in my opinion. You have to get out and show appreciation, gratitude, that hopefully creates a longer lasting customer. And if we're fortunate, sales, immediate sales.
Well, and with that, that'll have to be the last comment because we're out of time. These things always go way too fast for me. But thanks, Paul, Max, Jeff, Danny, Amy. Grateful for all your participation. And to the wine industry out there, just let me underscore, we actually have an opportunity that you'll never see again in your lifetime with this kind of consumer change, with this dining at home thing, with a time. You can't buy time, but guess what? It's going to fall into our laps with this change. You got to figure out how to get your share of growth, of this growth in demand. You got to be in the dining room tables of your customers. You got to understand what they want, whether they're young or old, and you got to service them. You've got to still do what we've talked about for a long time and take the experience on the road. You got to establish yourself in regions. Don't be a 5,000 case winery distributed in 50 states.
Right.
You got to, if there's ever been a thing that has been made more clear in this, it's the fact that you've got to have data hygiene. You've got to figure out how to collect names, and don't let those people that walk into your tasting room and don't join your club and don't let them walk out without getting their name, because guess what? They tried your product. You got through that sample part of it. Collect that name. There can't be any more obvious thing in this challenge that we've all faced, that the value of names and data is critical. And that slide that had, showing that over half of the industry didn't even have anybody looking at data. We've got that's on us. We got to do a better job of that, and we can. But the opportunity is there. I want to encourage everybody out there to go after it, because when this turns, the one thing that we have in this recession that we didn't have in other recessions, I didn't quite finish my thought, but the sad part of this is we have the lower wage people that have been damaged, but we don't have as much capital destruction. We don't have the ruination of business in quite the same way that we did in other recessions. And so it's a lot easier to hire people in than it is to actually raise capital to start a new business, to get the company going, than to hire more people. So I don't think we're in a V-shaped recovery. It's not doing like this, but I do think it's a Nike swoosh. I think we can actually come back a lot faster than people say. I think we have to evaluate what we do as individual business people. I think we have to be light on our feet, pivot fast, and you have to look at managing with budgets. I hate to be a finance guy and drop that in at the end, but you can't probably hire all your staff back. You're going to have to play it by ear and see what kind of response you get when you're opening, and then we're gonna fall and we're gonna learn, and that's okay. We're still going to share best practices and things we learn along the way, but we've never had a better opportunity to evolve and change and adapt, and I know we will. The demand is there, and that's the important thing. So with that, I'm going to wish you all well. I hope to see you all at Silicon Valley Bank one of these days, but thanks for your time and attention in this webinar, and thanks again to my panelists. You guys have a great week.